Welcome to the More You NoCo, bringing you conversations with insightful and fascinating people all around northern Colorado. I am your host, Ivan Wayne, and away we go. I was recently approached by a listener who wanted to share a very important topic for others to hear and allow them to ponder it for themselves. The topic of this episode is ketamine-assisted therapy. Ketamine is a synthetic dissociative anesthesia that therapists use to assist forms of psychotherapy with their patients. We are joined by two guests today, Sarah and Pierre. Sarah has been going through ketamine-assisted therapy with a therapist working out of Boulder by the name of Pierre Bouchard. And without further delay, here they both are. Hello, listener. Welcome back to the More You NoCo. Sit on campus here at Front Range in Fort Collins. I sit here with two people today with a topic I've been waiting for a while, and I'm excited about. I sit here. We're going to call her Sarah, even though that is not her real name. And I sit here with Pierre Bouchard. So Sarah, quote-unquote Sarah, reached out to me and wanted to bring to the More You NoCo this discussion and the idea of ketamine-assisted therapy. So if those words roll off my tongue and people have no idea what I just said, what is therapy that's assisted with ketamine?
Ketamine-assisted psychotherapy is a cutting-edge form of therapy that's been growing in notoriety and has been happening in more and more places. It is doing psychotherapy while someone is under the influence of ketamine. Now, ketamine is a dissociative anesthetic. It's been used since the early 70s in that capacity. And at low doses, it can be used sort of as a psychedelic and as a way of deepening into the psychotherapy process.
And Sarah, what brought you to this type of therapy? What was the journey that opened this door?
I've suffered from depression and anxiety for my whole life. Was really only diagnosed in my late 30s after an episode of postpartum depression. 3 years after that, I had been doing talk therapy and taking antidepressants, but I was still exhibiting some symptoms of depression. And notably among those was kind of like getting angry really easily. A conversation with my nurse psychiatrist kind of uncovered some childhood sexual abuse and like living with an alcoholic parent. And though she suggested that that stuff was some trauma that maybe wasn't being addressed fully, and suggested that this therapy might be able to help with it.
And did you know about ketamine? Did you have any predisposed notions when she brought it up, or were you like, let me do a Google search?
I did know about ketamine. As a wildlife biologist, I had I'd heard of ketamine being used for anesthetizing animals so that you can work on them in the field. I know that it has kind of a short lifespan, so you can administer it, and then pretty quickly animals come out of that. So that's how I had heard of it. And so the idea of using it in a therapeutic way was completely sort of bonkers to me.
Right.
Yeah.
So in the field, the realm of psychedelics and hallucinogens, how would we compare ketamine? And I'm asking this truly, not just as an interview question, but like, I really don't know. How would you explain it in comparison to like MDMA or psilocybin, which is the active ingredient in magic mushrooms? How is it different, and where does it fit in?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And one I think a lot of people are asking right now. So the three you named are all really different, right? So mushrooms fits in what's called a classic psychedelic. So this is the realm of mescaline, LSD, mushrooms, right? You take a thing, there's like a visionary experience, and what we all think of sort of classically as a psychedelic experience often occurs. MDMA is a very different compound, one that some people are calling an empathogen, right? It's not a classic psychedelic, and yet it seems to be beautifully useful in terms of treating PTSD and anxiety. And then you've got ketamine, which is a dissociative anesthetic. What's interesting, I think, about all of this is that the experience of these things and the mechanisms in the brain in which these things work are all very different. And yet they're all producing these non-ordinary states that are really useful in psychotherapy. They are allowing patients to get sort of deeper into their own process and access material they haven't had access to before. All in their own ways are leading us in a similar direction in terms of a more accelerated path toward healing.
And Sarah, what has your experience with ketamine-assisted therapy been like?
I've been doing it for about 2 years, maybe once a month or so, and every experience is different. Literally never the same. But it has definitely helped where talk therapy never could. Talk therapy for me kind of hit a ceiling, sort of this glass ceiling, like where you could see that there was the possibility of feeling better, but you couldn't reach it. And with ketamine-assisted therapy, this particular type of therapy, I have been able to really address a lot of the things that were sort of, underlying, I think, some of the reasons why I was experiencing depression and anxiety. Which isn't to say that those things are going to go away necessarily entirely, but they're definitely more manageable now.
Now, as part of this, the dissociative part where we sort of get this ego separation, and it's almost like, this is such a hard thing to explain without talking for 30 minutes straight, but it's like a hill that is fresh snow, right?
Yes.
It's nice and clean. It's even when we're children. And then as we learn things, we have life experiences, trauma comes in, bias, perspective, opinions. Those are like tracks walking through the snow, sled hills that carve through the snow, and you get these really easy to take, deep-rooted areas that have already been tracked by a lot of other people. And we consider that habits or like ways of thinking. And so if you're able to separate yourself from that previous experience, it's like the hill goes back to being fresh powdered snow and allows you to almost look at your own brain from outside of yourself. Is that kind of appropriately explain this, or?
I think it's close. I would say that it helps for me anyway. It's an analogy that I like. I've heard it before. I like it. Each time I do this work, it's almost like the ruts get shallower, right? So it's not a complete clearing of that snowfield. It's not a reset button, but each time those ruts get shallower, so it's easier to see out of them that there might be a different way of thinking or a different way of doing. And the hope eventually, I guess, is that the rut does kind of like go away, more and more.
And while you're on ketamine, are you talking? Are you having conversation? Are you sitting?
I usually lay down. It makes you a little dizzy. And I wear an eye mask because bright light is not comfortable. It does kind of enhance senses. Things tend to be louder. Noises tend to be louder. Sometimes there is talking and sometimes there isn't.
And you just see what happens.
Yes.
It does it, in a metaphorical way, it brings up a mirror and you're able to see things, look at yourself, or, how I assume that these experiences are so hard to put into words because language itself is such a limiting paradigm. But
it is.
If you could try to explain it for our eager fans out there.
Yeah, you do. There can be sort of a psychedelic, visual experience to it, but there is also practice, I think, and this is maybe where I think where the work that I'm doing with Pierre differs from sort of other ketamine-assisted therapy that people do for depression and anxiety, where, they kind of like just plug into an IV for 45 minutes and then they're done. I don't know how to explain waves. It needs explaining. So one of the things that happens during a ketamine session are these somatic waves. And I think you should try to explain what those are.
Okay. Well, let me take a step back and address a little bit about something you said earlier. So I love the metaphor of the hillside covered in snow. It's a really great one, and it's one that Michael Pollan in his book How to Change Your Mind uses. And it's a really apt description, especially for high dose mushroom use. Some of the research that's been happening at Johns Hopkins and among other places has been around treating depression with high dose mushroom sessions, right? Where people are basically aiming for a dose that's going to produce what's called like an ego death experience, like the cessation of the ego. And so what's interesting about that, right, is that, there's this solid separate sense of self diminishes, and yet awareness remains. And yet there's still an experience happening. It's like, well, who's that experience happening to? When the brain experiences something of that magnitude, there can be a really massive reset. That seems to really, for a lot of people, shake up and dislodge a depression. Unfortunately, most of us don't have access legally to mushrooms to do this kind of thing just yet. There are different ways ketamine is being used right now. The most common way ketamine is being used right now is at these places that are called infusion clinics. So you go, you get hooked up to an IV, and you're basically left in a dark room and you have a big experience. Now, the doses you're getting on these kind of ketamine treatments are quite high. It would be very difficult to talk during these. And what's happening is that people often experience a reduction in depressive symptoms after this for somewhere between 2 and 4 weeks. And then the symptoms start to reemerge. So this might be more akin to the mountain covered in fresh snow analogy. The thing is, right, over time, so you can get a reset. Yet, over time, those ruts reemerge. The style of ketamine-assisted psychotherapy that I'm doing tries to get at the root of those ruts. So we're using a lower dose, and we're doing a style of experiential body-based psychotherapy. I have my clients go back into these early memories. And what's great about ketamine is that, it's great about really any of the psychedelics, is that you don't have to say okay, now I'm going toward this memory. It just emerges very spontaneously, very naturally. And so then from that place, we're able to enter in very deeply, very vividly into that memory experience and have somebody have a chance to sort of begin reprocessing what they didn't have the capacity to at the time, or the experience happened too fast. Getting a chance to slow that whole process down and have the mind and nervous system reintegrate from there.
But I will say that it's not always like a literal memory in your brain, right? Or in your conscience. Sometimes it's just a body memory. There's connections in your brain, your body remembers. So I don't always necessarily think about my memories, but I experience them.
Right. And so what's great about this is that, right, we don't remember every moment of our lives. We can't remember every awful thing that happened to us, at least in a discrete way.
Right.
Right? Like, these are not, you can't call each one of these things up. And yet, these things were encoded into our nervous system. And so by addressing the body directly, we can get right to that, even if there's no discrete memory.
When we first made contact, I had this question to ask you if you thought that the line was shifting in our perceptions towards psychedelics and these types of assisted therapies. And in between the time that I first contacted you and today, or you first contacted me, Denver decriminalized psilocybin, magic mushrooms. So I guess there's our answer. It's moving forward. But Sarah, you might say it hasn't moved enough, or we still have a long ways to go.
I mean, I would say that I feel incredibly lucky to live in this place, in this moment, that the stars aligned, that this became available to me. And I cannot even begin to imagine how many people are out there that could benefit from this, but there is no practitioner in their area. There's not a practitioner in Fort Collins. And so I drive to, I get rides to Boulder and get rides home, because that's what I need to do. And I feel really, just incredibly lucky that's able to happen for me. Certainly things are moving forward, but there definitely could be more.
You mentioned ability to get treatment, but I think the first thing, and a big conversation is just what people think of this type of stuff and the lack of education. So there are people out there struggling with things that could be assisted with ketamine or some other, psychotropic experience, but they don't even know. Or they just think about college kids getting a rectangle, putting it on their tongue and tripping out for 12 hours, or going to Burning Man. This is what people think. Mm-hmm. They don't know about these clinical trials that are being run at Johns Hopkins. They don't hear stories like yours. They don't know that this is happening. And maybe it's just putting a face to it. Maybe it's giving it a narrative, but I think slowly people like Joe Rogan and other podcasts out there and, other networks, and I know Johns Hopkins does a good job about putting some of their work on YouTube, and, those scholarly articles are getting out there. But I think education and just letting people know these are not people getting together and dressing in extremely loose, questionable clothing and then having a crazy time. These are people who are seeking assistance, and these substances it's one leg they can stand on, to be better for tomorrow. And I feel like that perception is going to be very important.
Absolutely. And I think it's amazing. I've really noticed in my private practice, the number of people that have had inquiries or have expressed some kind of curiosity in psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy has really grown pretty dramatically in the last year. And I think Michael Pollan's book, How to Change Your Mind, came out about a year ago. And I can't think of like a single other thing that has had probably the impact that has. I mean, he's been such a measured and reputable guy, in his inquiries into food. And so the fact that he's taken an interest in psychedelics and has, he came to this as a real skeptic. He did not come to this as like a drug guy who was looking to substantiate his own interests, right? Like he was in middle age and had never done any of these things. I've started just referring to him as the wingman. I think he's done such a fantastic job of bringing this to the mainstream. But you're right. I think a lot of people don't know about it, and I feel very optimistic. I see a growing interest and growing curiosity with this all the time. I know there's going to be a training for psychotherapists in the Boulder area this fall, and there are more trainings coming online. I'm supervising several psychotherapists, and this is changing. We're in the beginning of not the beginning, but we are really in the midst of a massive change in the landscape of what psychotherapy is.
Mm. I myself have had undisclosed friends have psychedelic and hallucinogenic experiences. They had the popular media idea of what they thought they should expect on this trip. And afterwards, when I asked them about it, they said that they had these thoughts and it was a totally different experience than what they were expecting. And I was kind of probing and asking them, and they came to tell me that they looked at some of these things they didn't want to look at before, and they faced them with such gravity, and they were like, I thought that I was just going to take this, play video games, and hang out for like 10 hours. And they said, I was sitting there on my couch, lost in my head. And I'm grateful for having that experience. But they would say that it was not at all what they expected. And, I think some people might find this by reading the book by Michael Pollan. Some people may hear it from a short multimedia clip online. And some people may find it out for themselves. And, this is a slow-moving target, but 2 years ago, I knew nothing about this. And now it's something I fully support, and I wish more people knew about it.
Yeah, me too. And I think...
Right, same here.
Yeah.
2 years ago, I hadn't heard of it either, and now I'm obviously a big fan and advocate.
What was your first experience like? Was it overwhelming, or is it hard to remember? Or?
It's a little hard to remember. And I think, like I said, every experience is different. So even in my most recent one was tremendous and really, it was really tremendous and really sort of groundbreaking for me. I still like the rut thing. It's sort of smoothing out some of these ruts around boundaries, around intrusive negative thoughts, around my ability to be authentic in my relationships, and really sort of being able to set aside old habits or old thought patterns. Yeah, I came out of yesterday just in a completely different than the way I had walked into the office.
So after these therapies, is it somewhat easier to put yourself back in that frame of mind? How do these therapy sessions follow you after, the ketamine has subsided?
So sometimes there is an immediate, boost, and sometimes there isn't. Really just depends. Again, I'm not taking a high dose IV kind of thing. It's a low dose experience. It's really been like the path of the practice over the last couple of years that has really made a difference. There were incremental changes in my ability to, say, set boundaries, and incremental changes in my ability to sort of turn off negative and intrusive thoughts, incremental changes in my ability to be authentic in relationships. Like all of those things got better and better and better over time. It hasn't ever been like a dramatic experience.
Tiny steps, right?
Yes.
Running a marathon seems overwhelming for many people, but the old adage is one step at a time.
Yes.
And what you said earlier about how some people will see strong positive effects for a limited amount of time afterwards, and then things kind of regress. You reminded me of making your bed. Just because we make it once doesn't mean it's forever made. We'll have to remake it tomorrow again. I don't know if that applicably applies, but
I think it's a seductive fantasy that we could take a drug and it would fix us. That's just a sexy notion. We like that in this country. We like the idea that a pill will fix us. We like the idea of an injection would fix us. I think we like the idea of eating a mushroom and that would fix us. And I just think the path toward healing is more complicated than that. It's actually more interesting too, right? That any of these things, whether it's ketamine now or I think we can expect MDMA to be rescheduled to a Schedule 3 within the next few years, and really in psychotherapy in general. What these things offer are a window of time to get to know yourself more and to engage in the healing process. There's no chemical that's just going to fix you. It's more than anything, it's providing you a window to get to know yourself more and to have the healing occur within you. And often what's really required for healing, from my perspective as a psychotherapist, is two things. It's loving attention on a painful thing and being in connection with someone else while you do that.
That other person piece, you think that's very crucial to these?
Yeah. We like to say in psychotherapy, relational wounds are healed in relationship.
See, and that's such a strong point, because I feel like when people consider these types of therapy or these substances, they think, oh, okay, drop the substance, things are healed. But, we are social creatures from birth and, until our last day. And bringing those together, people, substance, assistance, working through it, patience, time,
absolutely,
repeated efforts. It's a huge equation. It's a big picture.
Absolutely. If it were only the drug, then everyone who did ecstasy in the 90s would be, highly well adjusted now.
Right, which is not the case.
I presume.
I remember growing up with those super dramatic, 60-minute 2020 Dateline specials. You'll never believe what 20-year-old students are doing at the clubs now. Ecstasy, MDMA, and then just paint it like it's, the second coming of Satan.
Yeah, we're good at that. I think there was such a scare after the 60s. There was such a moral panic about what was occurring and how this would bring down the country that I think that really reverberated for many decades, and with good reason. People got hurt. People were, taking really strong chemicals in completely unmediated ways. There were casualties to that. There's no indigenous culture where psychedelic plant medicine is used where they just say, go take this and go wander off on your own and party.
There's always a shaman.
There's always a shaman. There's always a very specific ritual and context to it. And that's not to say that, experimenting with these things is a bad thing. I don't believe that to be true. I don't believe it to be the most efficient way to use them for healing, though.
Many cultures revere them with high levels of respect, tradition, and responsibility. You need to experience this, but know what you're getting into, And here's what we think of it. I just listened to a podcast with Graham Hancock, and they were looking at these ancient civilizations who were built around, and I don't know if it was ketamine, it might have been, but they had these cultural symbols, and a lot of things indicated that a lot of their cultural importance and even their coming of age story at a certain age in society was being involved with some sort of hallucinogen psychedelic experience.
Right.
And they revered it as, it came from nature, and it was what made them. It helped them all become who they were, and it was held up in that way.
Yeah, truly. So it wouldn't have been ketamine because that was synthesized.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a
in the
synthetic.
60s. It's a synthetic chemical. But your point stands, right? That there's a way of taking psychedelics recreationally where it's mostly fun. Maybe, right? Who knows what you're getting into?
It depends.
Yeah, right. You could go.
Do you have
go
your
up
formal or informal shaman there?
Well, no, but I mean, right, if you're going to a concert, you might have a good time, and, some difficult stuff might come up. Often what I think people are describing when they talk about a bad trip is actually stuff that's been begging to be witnessed and known in them. And it's overwhelming, and there's no one there to help them through it. But I think your point really stands about, there's a lot of evidence probably that rites of passage into adulthood also contained plant medicine as part of it, because it is an ordeal, right? And to be confronted with an ordeal is really the point of a rite of passage, right? To get to have something that's intense that you have to grow through. In that context, plant medicine makes an immense amount of sense.
Well, listener, I hope that we've given you more questions and answers in this episode. And please, if you're curious at all, I beg you to get out there, even just a quick internet search, give these things a shot. You never know what just a little bit of knowledge and conversation can do for you or another person who, you might move the tide, move that needle in someone's mind, or someone in your life could even benefit from just you knowing, because we have people like Pierre in the area who are helping folks. And I thank you both for your honesty and your vulnerability to be here, and thank you for your time.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you. And you can find me at pierrebouchardcounseling.com.
Yes, I should have asked you, where can we find you? Social media, internet, website?
Yeah. So Facebook, Pierre Bouchard LPC, and my website, pierrebouchardcounseling.com. And my office is in Boulder.
Okay, thank you both. For more about this podcast or our other guests, visit www.themoreyouKnowco.com. We have had so many wonderful conversations, you have to give the other episodes a shot. You never know what you're going to find. Thank you to Trevor for mixing and editing all our episodes. Thank you to Kelsey for our awesome logo and artwork. And Russell Isaac Long, my man, and guest of episode 67, is responsible for all our music used here on The More You Know Co. So grateful for you, my friend. We will be back soon, listener. Who will it be? What the heck are we going to discuss next? Until next time, peace.